I got it. Okay. So who do I have with me today?
Who do she have with you right now?
Oh, my name is Monty Gilbreth.
Nice to meet you, Monty. And the one next to you?
Rhonda.
Hi, Rhonda. And then who else do I have in the room that might be a board member?
That's it.
That's
That's
it.
it. Okay.
Got Linda Fargan, she's on the phone listening, and so she'll be using the training thing.
Okay. Well, I am recording this, and I will be happy to share this with you as soon as we're finished. But I just wanted to, actually, Amy, do they know what we're doing today, or what are we doing? Do I need to do an introduction?
You can if you want.
Okay. So first of all, can you see my slide that says CSBG board training?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Susan Carr, and I am the executive director of an agency called CSNO, which is Community Services Network of Wyoming, and we're a membership organization providing training and technical assistance to those community action agencies who receive CSBG funding. And one of the things that we do.
Hold on 1 second. Here we go.
Oh. There we go. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Looks like it says that you changed your speaker again.
Can you hear me?
Something about your deaf something. Oops. Shall we call you on the phone, Susan?
You just can't hear me at all?
I can't hear you.
I'm afraid if I leave the whole thing will stop.
Audio had changed again.
No, my microphone, hold on. Go in
So
here.
just since we have that, this recorded, I'll send you the recording, okay?
Let me try one thing. I'm gonna unplug my mic and plug it back in and see if that helps. Hold on.
Please leave a message after the.
Susan was saying something.
Please leave a message after.
Can you guys hear me now? Because I just unplugged my mic and plugged it back in.
Yes.
And I wrote down who did that first. So thank you.
Can you guys hear me now? Because I just unplugged it and plugged it back in.
After the tone. When you are finished.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm gonna get echo, I'm
You
worrying.
put yourself on mute on your computer.
Oh, okay. Let me find.
Okay, it's not working. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I am still getting echo because of my phone.
Fine.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I just turned down my volume.
Oh, for some reason now did you turn the volume down on which one? Did you turn the volume down on your phone?
Okay.
Try unmuting yourself on the computer again, and let's see if that is okay now.
Can you hear me now?
No. But go ahead. Okay, call me back.
Okay, how about now? No?
How does that work?
How about now? Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you through my phone.
That's fine.
Okay, can you hear me?
We talk now though.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right, so now I've muted myself,
Same.
okay? And I don't know why I'm getting any sound from that computer.
Okay,
Let's just go with the modified version.
yeah, well, we're gonna.
I don't know what the modified version.
Okay, so I'm just getting weird echoes and that is, I'm just gonna tough it out, okay?
Okay,
All right.
We don't hear any echo, so we're good.
Okay, good.
okay.
I'm just gonna.
I'm just gonna ignore it.
All right, so my name is Susan. I'm the Executive Director of CSNO, which is the Community Services Network of Wyoming. And we're a membership organization that provides training and technical assistance. No, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, you're falling out.
Oh, okay, because you were shaking your head at me and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose
It's
my mind.
right here at the same time for my printer, and it keeps popping up.
Okay,
So one of the things that I do is I work with the community action boards. And by virtue of taking CSBG funding as one of your funding streams, you become a community action agency and you sit on the board of a community action board. And it's wonderful. And I hope that today we're going to just talk a little bit about what it means to be on a board and what roles we have that take care of that. Now, I am going to play a video, two videos. So I hope you guys can hear it. We'll find out. Okay. So to get started, I just kind of wanted to check in with you guys. Are you guys all new board members right now?
No.
Nope. Okay. So who's been on the board for under 3 years? How many people?
Both of them.
Both of them under 3 years. So nobody's been on it longer than 3 years?
No.
5 years? A lifetime, eternity? Okay. So that just kind of gives me an idea of how long you guys have been serving on community action and what that looks like from this point forward. So one of the, how many of you, and I can't see, you have to tell me, have served on other boards or have other board experience?
Not I.
Okay. Monty, about you?
Yeah,
You have? So,
city council.
oh, for city council, okay. So there's a lot of board training that goes a long time sometimes with, Monty, did we meet last time I was down there?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. What we're going to talk about really quick is the difference. There's not a whole lot of board difference other than there are some legal requirements from the federal government when it comes to serving on a community action agency board. But really, you know, this is about CSVG. It talks about organizational standards and things that we have to do. And those are really just best practices of what it looks like when we are talking about board management or board governance. So that hasn't changed that much. So just to get started, because I think missions are super important, this
This is the mission of CSBG.
This is providing assistance to states and local communities, working through a network of community action agencies and other neighborhood-based organizations, just like you guys, for the reduction of poverty, for the revitalization of low-income communities and the empowerment of low-income families and individuals in rural and urban areas to become fully sufficient. And while that is a mouthful, and it has a lot of things that are encompassed in that mission has been seen since 1964. In Converse County, your guys' mission is slightly different, but it still talks about your dedication, your passion to reducing poverty by empowering people through education, advocacy, crisis intervention, and by providing opportunities towards self-sufficiency through partnerships with local and regional organizations. And I think that that is an amazing mission statement. And I always urge my board members that I'm working with is if you don't feel a little bit of turn in your stomach about excitement or passion about what your mission is, maybe this isn't the right role. Community action is one of the most powerful things in America. This is what helps people move forward by changing lives. And I want to tell you a story really quick about community action and how it works in Wyoming. Before I was the executive director of CSNO, I was the executive director and CEO of a community action agency serving 3 counties in northern Wyoming. And this was one of our stories. And I love sharing this story because it tells so much about the power of community action. Last spring, one of our team members was contacted by a mom with 2 children who was being evicted and had to vacate her home by 5 o'clock the next day. This was a mom who was in relatively early substance abuse recovery, who literally had nowhere to go and no support in moving. Her financial situation had just recently changed as she had just left an abusive relationship. And this created more safety for her family, but they really definitely felt a financial strain. The staff members at Compass reassured the mom that they would begin working on solutions and would get back to her the next day. Within hours, the staff member had connected with a local church who not only said that they would help pay for a week of temporary housing in a motel, but also agreed to find help to physically move the family's belongings. This staff member then found another community partner who paid for the U-Haul. The next day, 5 men from our faith community showed up to help this family move their belongings to a storage shed and settle into temporary housing, albeit there was a roof over their head. Another pastor offered to assist with paying for 2 more weeks of housing at the motel, and then invited the mom to celebrate recovery after finding out she was a recovering addict. The staff member then coordinated with the school counselor who started the McKinney-Vento paperwork, which ensures educational protections for youth in transition, also known as homeless youth. And one of the things it does is it guarantees transportation to and from school, which was huge for this working mom and her kids. Over the next several days, the staff member and the mom covered a lot of referrals and resources, including a list of low-income housing options, the VOA Rapid Response Housing Program, weekend food bags for her and her children. They got her set up with SNAP benefits for long-term food. And then through extra support through case management at Northern Wyoming Mental Health, mom received additional addiction counseling. This list goes on and on and on. And within the month, the family was able to get into stable low-income housing. And the most important thing about this is that these 2 children did not miss 1 minute of school during this very tumultuous time. Mom was able to stay sober and felt supported by and connected to her community and her school. CSBG funding was a huge part of the resources used by the staff member to assist this family. That is the power of community action and the ways that this incredibly important grant can be used to assist families moving from crisis and dependency to stabilization and even thriving. And I tell that story because it really shows that one agency cannot be all things to all people all of the time. We have to depend on our neighbors, our community partnerships, our stakeholders, additional funders to be able to make true and lasting change. And I'm so excited to see that happen in Converse County. This changeover from providing only emergency stabilization funding to a case management model that teaches people how to do this, to empower them so they're not walking alone. So I'm going to skip through this. So in community action, as a board member, you have an important job. Federally, by law, each community action agency is governed by a tripartite board, which you are part of. A tripartite board structure in compliance with the CSBG Federal Act should consist of at least 1/3 democratically selected representatives of the low-income community, 1/3 local elected officials or their representatives, and then the remaining membership from major groups and interests in the community. And the reason we do that is because we believe that people who with lived experience have lived expertise. And by having their voice heard as a piece of the power that determines how community actions move forward in addressing the causes and concerns of poverty is critical to our success. So what does a community action agency board of directors do? Well, the reason we have boards is because staff members come and go. They transition. Programs change, but the board offers a certain consistency in purpose and intent and in responsibility because we as board members do not look at what's happening today, but look at where this agency is going to be in the next 5 years. How are we going to remain sustainable? How do we know where our funding is coming from? And is our mission being adhered to? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? The governing board acts as a body. We don't act as individuals. And there are certain duties and responsibilities that come along with that. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. CSNO does offer more in-depth intensive training opportunities specifically for board members. This is a very brief kind of look at a board makeup in general, but in other trainings, we can go really deep into planning and strategic planning and legal aspects for board members and how to work within the community. We do know that board members shoulder significant responsibility for oversight. They are fully participatory in the development, planning, implementation, and evaluation of programs. And that's called ROMA, Results Oriented Management and Accountability Foundation. We'll talk about that later. And we have to find ways to fulfill their responsibilities, maintaining that governance role while not dipping into operational activities. It's really important that board members recognize day-to-day operations are managed by their chief executive officer. They're there to provide guidance, strategic planning, fundraising, development, and other things. So when we talk about boards, somebody came up to you and said, hey, you want to serve on my board? And you said, yeah, because that's why you're here today. But I want to make sure that you take a deep look inside yourself and go, wait, why are you here? Why you? We're going to watch this really quick video and then we'll ask some questions after. Can you hear that?
No.
See, and that's what I was afraid of because I have no sound and you have no internal microphone to be able to hear that. So I am going to send those to Amy and she can send those out and we will talk about those later. So as we move on, I had mentioned that there are some legal requirements, legal responsibilities for serving on a board. State Nonprofit Corporations Act and the Article Incorporation of bylaws, those first things that we talk about. Converse County CSBG began being formed as a nonprofit corporation under Wyoming's Nonprofit Corporation Act. You guys were required to file articles of incorporation with the state, and you developed a set of bylaws that really established that how the board will operate. And even though many CAAs were formed in the 1960s, the Wyoming State Nonprofit Corporation Act continues to apply. That haven't had many changes on that. And so it's really important that your agency understand your individual state's nonprofit corporate act's current requirements, or work with an attorney who has experience working with nonprofit organizations in Wyoming. Wyoming has some very favorable laws and statutes when it comes to nonprofit boards. You have a lot of protection by state statute. So there's also the IRS has a lot of rules for you. One of the things I always like to say, what's the difference between a for-profit business and a nonprofit business? Well, it's literally 3 lines of tax code. And when a nonprofit board pays itself out of profits, you're going to go to jail. The IRS basically exempts a nonprofit from paying federal taxes so long as the nonprofit is engaged in activities that further its charitable purpose. A nonprofit's mission, which we read earlier, typically reflects that greater specificity of the charitable purpose. One of the things that's a big misconception is nonprofits don't pay taxes. Wrong. We do still pay payroll taxes. We pay into payroll taxes, workman's comp taxes, unemployment insurance. And in the state of Wyoming, we contributed over $3 million to the state's payroll tax law. Federal CSBG Act, grant regulations and guidance. We were formed under the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964. We're governed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. That is the federal agency that oversees our program. Additionally, the Federal Office of Community Services is the department within the Health and Human Services Administration that helps us work and provide guidance around CSBG. At the state level, we are managed through the Department of Health at the Community Service Program. Because CSBG is a block grant, states have the primary authority to manage and facilitate the funding, and in an effort to do so, sometimes states pass their own CSBG legislation, regulations, and policies. At this time, the state of Wyoming does not have any state legislation around CSBG. However, we do have regulations and policies through the Department of Health. In order to receive CSBG funding, CAPs or community action agencies, we enter into contracts with the state to make sure that we are doing everything that we're supposed to do legally. And there are other federal state funding requirements that agencies that we receive funding from other sources, which include other governance requirements that apply to the CAA board. So let's talk a little bit more about why each one of these requirements is important for boards to know and how they affect the way in which a board governs the organization. So as you're sitting on the seat of the board, they talk about that fiduciary responsibility. This is the role that a board takes on as caretakers for the mission of the organization. The mission here was established to provide public service. Your job is to steward those resources, the people, the investments, the times, the goals, the plans toward that mission and the purpose of
Those
so
agencies.
your responsibility is to make sure that the organization is always acting in the best interest of the public and the other stakeholders that are served by the organization mission. Governance is the board's legal authority to exercise that power and authority on an organization on behalf of the people and the community it serves. In addition to that, there are some legal duties that come along with that. The duty of care is making sure that your care for the mission and the agency, the way a normally prudent person would care for another, like the power of attorney. You got to know what's going on. You got to be prepared for meetings, and you have to volunteer for service outside of the meetings to help the organization succeed. There's also the duty of loyalty. Remaining loyal to that mission by putting the interests of the organization before personal and professional interests. Monitor your conflicts of interest. Board composition is diverse. Don't allow a major conflict of interest to dominate the board. Support the decisions that are made by the board. And that leads to the duty of obedience, because we have to make sure that we're honoring all laws, federal, state, and local, and those that you set for yourself in your bylaws. You remain guardians of that mission. You retain bipartisanship. Register in the states where you fundraise, making sure that if you're fundraising in Wyoming, you are properly registered. You're registered to do so. And then finally, the duty of transparency. Conduct business in the light and operate a clean business. Make your 990s publicly available. Publish an annual report. Clear the channels of communication for the public to be able to contact your organization whenever possible. So this video here really talks about the different roles between the executive director and the board. And again, I'll have Amy send those out to you since we're not able to watch those right now. So who does do what around here, right?
Right.
Often arises from board members who are not fully understanding their roles within that organization. So maintaining a fine balance between the board's role and the actions the boards take to fulfill that role versus the executive director's role and the actions he or she takes can be really tricky. So this exercise here encourages board members to recognize and discuss their understanding of a few of the different roles and actions that each of very important contributions to the organization and how they play out. The default for the board is that the board is the overseer and the
Picture thinker.
whereas the executive director is the doer. While in reality, there is definitely overlap, I really invite you to keep that in mind, and it will really help boards and executive directors basically stay in their lane, right? Generally, the action of each party takes in the regards to each other in each role is, let's look at policy, right? So the action is to establish and execute policy and procedure at your organization. So on the first one, the board is the one that establishes the organizational policy while the executive director executes them. This often means that the board will recognize the need for a policy and assign a board committee to oversee the development of that policy by staff. And in rare occasions, you know, the board committee may fully develop the policy itself, but this is intended to be a collaborative process. And that helps answer questions about, well, what happens when this happens? Do we have a good whistleblower policy? What happens if someone feels like maybe the executive director is acting in a sketchy way? What's the procedure? How do we protect those employees as required by federal law? There are things around how we do internal controls, how we do finances, how we sign checks. But one of the things that the board is responsible for is while you, in conjunction with your leadership team, establish those policies, it is still up to the executive director to carry those out. So when you carry those out, it's because she has had prior approval from the board. This is a big thing that happens on performance, especially around budgets, right? So the board will say, okay, we're going to approve this budget. We developed this budget and we approve that you're going to spend this much money on contracting with for optimization to provide services, right? So that means that the executive director has been authorized by the board to pay that bill as those bills come up. The board doesn't get involved with already budgeted expenses, approved budgeted expenses. And every board looks at it differently. Right? So you may have a policy that says, hey, I don't care what we budgeted. If it's over $5,000, the board needs to see this. Or if it's like, you're not allowed to make a purchase over $10,000. Those are policies that the executive director and the board establishes together. So when it comes to our mission, the mission that we talked about, it's up to the board of directors and it's their responsibility to make sure that they're setting, review, and updating that mission as necessary. The board is the leader with regards to establishing this mission, whereas the executive director and her staff focuses on achieving and accomplishing that mission. Even though the board takes the lead on mission development, the executive director really plays a crucial role in that process by informing the board about the needs driving the work and guiding the development of that mission. Next, under performance. Performance is a little trickier because it does encompass both programmatic and operational performance. However, the actions that the board and the executive director take to fulfill the roles for each is very similar. So for both programmatic and operational performance, the board is regularly evaluating how the organization is doing. The board sets those overarching performances and operational targets that are updated based on evaluations, and the board is ultimately accountable for the organization's success and challenges. Or the executive director is guiding that work to meet the targets set by the board and is also accountable for the performance. As part of that accountability, the executive director will likely engage in a level of evaluation and revising the work being done to meet the overarching goals and targets set by the board. So employees, the board supervises and evaluates one employee. She is the executive director. The executive director is authorized by the board to manage and supervise the staff of the organization. As discussed in greater detail when we were talking earlier, there are going to be a handful of instances when the board might have to work directly with the staff. That typically comes from whistleblower policies or complaints from the staff that deal directly with the executive director. So there are some common board missteps that happen to every board. I have served on literally 100 of boards, and I know that I have seen these happen a lot. So the board's tasked to find that middle ground, not to get involved too much in the day-to-day management, but be willing to ask questions about specific issues and concerns, right? You're going to gather facts. You're going to gather data to support the decisions and interact with senior management as needed. But you have to keep your focus on the overall mission and what policies and programs will be there to support it. So one of the biggest common missteps that we see is micromanagement. And I always tell my boards, whether I serve on them or as if I am the executive director, if the board is asking me how much money we're spending on paper clips, we got a real big problem here. So oversight should never, ever be confused with board involvement in day-to-day management decisions. So as a general rule, boards do not directly interact with frontline staff or operations. That's senior management's role. The board member who decides to attend a weatherization staff performance evaluation, or the board member who offers classroom management suggestions to one of the teachers, has really crossed that line into micromanagement. Board members acting as individuals, this is a tough one. It's really important for individual board members to remember that you're really a part of a larger body, and that in order to properly fulfill your duties as a board member, you have to act at the direction of the full board and not as individual motivations or concerns. And this can get really hard because guess what? We're human, we're messy, and we don't always agree on things. And so there's always going to be, I hope, lively, intentional conversations that happen, that we can agree to disagree. But once a board has made a decision, we act as one body. Another one that I see a lot, this happened to me, is a really super strong executive director where the board defers to the executive director for everything. Some boards view their role as cheerleaders, with the board deferring to the executive director in all matters. And while this often happens when the executive director is a strong executive director like I have been in the past, some boards simply just don't understand that they still have a governance or an oversight role. The board should always be supportive of the executive director, sharing insights and expertise. But there are going to need to be some institutional tension between the board and the executive director. And this also means that the board understands its role in the care and feeding of their chief executive officer. While the board's primary function is to evaluate the ED's performance and progress in accomplishing the mission, a thoughtful, strong board is going to ensure that it is providing everything that senior leadership and executive director needs to not only survive, but to thrive. It's really incumbent upon the board and the executive director who is faced with this situation to act intentionally to devise and implement, some strategies and processes to empower the board. And this can be done through changes in bylaws, board size, committee structures. But what's really important is that we set the right tone and the meeting structure to encourage questions and comments from the board and still provide the support necessary for a director to run the agency in the best way possible. Not discussing critical issues. This is really hard. In our Western culture, in our Midwest and our Western culture, it's really sometimes hard for us to have difficult conversations. We never were really taught how to have difficult conversations. And sometimes it's easier just to sweat the small stuff rather than grapple with the great, big, huge elephant in the room. Boards have to find a way to strike that fine balance between reviewing operations on a regular basis and engaging in the strategic decisions that will sustain that organization. Sometimes we can not talk about the big things because we're worried about that. But there are ways that we can streamline and rework meeting agendas to focus on having those strategic discussions by sending materials in advance of meetings so board members can arrive prepared and ready to think through a lot of these pressing organizational matters. Some people take time to process. They have to mull on things for a little bit. They have to take some time. So some board members are going to need a lot more time than others to move through that process. I'm going to stop here really quick and ask you guys, have you, in your experience in serving on this board or other boards, seen any examples that you want to share as it comes to board missteps or a non-functioning board?
just wish that 4 months ago, when we had scheduled you, that had not been canceled, because this conversation would have been a good reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, you know, and like I said, I've served on countless boards. I've been executive director who has reported to boards. And it is a tough tightrope. It's a tightrope walk sometimes. And it's really hard to remember what my role is, especially when I move back and forth between being a board member and being an executive director, right? And in my case, Amy's one of my bosses, right? So Amy sits on the board of the CSNO, sits as a director on the board of the CSNO organization, and really helps me to lead the agency to make sure that we're meeting our mission. But yet she's still a member, and you know, so there are some really fine lines that we walk through. But knowing your role and things that we can do to make sure that we're always reminded that we have different roles, we have to stay in our lane. So really quickly, federal law requires any community action agency to adhere to a level of organizational standards. And this comprehensive set of standards really is not something that we just go through and check the boxes on. We really want to develop a culture of best practices. So while these are specific to community action, these organizational standards really do take a look at best practices for any organization to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to lower our risk factors and to ensure that we're doing a good job. So when we talk about maximum feasible participation, they talk about consumer input and involvement, and that means listening to your clients. They know their lives better than anybody. We are rooted in the belief that people with low incomes are in the best position to express what they need to make a difference in their lives. We work in partnership with a lot of different types of partners, or customers. Some of our customers are the ones that sit across the desk from us. Other customers are community stakeholders, our county commissioners, our city councils, our different funders. These are people and things that we need to take into consideration when we're deciding what is best for our community. Community action focuses on our community, not what's best for Wyoming, not what's best for the United States, but what's best for Converse County. The people who live there and call Converse County home are the ones that are best informed on what Converse County needs. And we do that through conducting community needs assessments. We also ensure that people in the board looks at the vision and the direction of that we're doing. There are several organizational standards that relate to organizational leadership. A well-functioning board, a focused chief executive officer, well-trained and dedicated staff and volunteers, all giving of themselves to help others is really going to establish your agency as the cornerstone and the leverage point to address poverty in Douglas and in the other towns that you provide services in Converse County. We talk about board, yes.
I hate to do this, but I've got a basketball game for my granddaughter that I have to go to.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to send this out to Amy. I am going to
Okay.
let her share this with you guys so you can
That's
see
fine.
everything that we're doing. I'm just going to flip through this really quick. And that is actually the end of my presentation. There are some practices that boards need to do to meet all organizational standards. And then that's it. So I'll share all this information with Amy, and let's pray for good weather so I can meet you guys all in person at your next board meeting. How does that sound, Amy?
Sounds great.
All right. I'll see you guys later, and I will talk to you soon.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.